Welcome to Liberation Hour Radio on 102.7 Sound FM in Waterloo and Kitchener, and also on Rogers 946 on cable and on Facebook and YouTube as Liberation Hour Radio. We're joined today with Liz White. Liz White is a long-term resident of Toronto, Ontario. She's the leader of the Animal Protection Party of Canada and a founding member of the Animal Alliance of Canada. She has remained with AAC for over 20 years. Liz began her career as a registered nurse and has spent all her working life advocating for a fair and just world. She has spent over 30 years as a community activist and has worked on issues including advocating for the disadvantaged, animal protection, and Aboriginal land settlements. In 1987, Liz began working with the Toronto Humane Society, an experience that redefined her activism. In 2005, Liz became the leader of APPC, the Animal Protection Party of Canada, and Liz has devoted herself to practical measures that result in substantive improvements for animals and the environment. Thank you so much for joining us, Liz.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So I'll start off asking, how are you doing and how are you doing coordinating your work now that we're all staying at home?
Well, it's for sure a big change, and we have 4 cats in the office that we rescued. Well, in July will be 11 years ago. So they have been used to having a lot of people in the office and a lot of interaction, and all of a sudden it's down to just one of us comes in each day, so nobody's overlapping. So things have changed for them. So part of my day is making sure that they're healthy, well, happy, and active. And the rest of the time we continue to fight for all the animals and the environment, and see if during this time that we can even work through some of the issues that we've been working on.
Okay. So tell us a bit about your background, how you first got into activism.
Well, I've been involved in activism for a long time. My ex was a city councillor in Toronto back in the late 70s and early 80s, and during that time we did a lot of activism work around expressways that were proposed to come into the city, so around environmental issues and a lot of social justice issues during that time. So I've been doing it for quite a long period of time, but it wasn't really until I went to the Toronto Humane Society and had my life challenged, shall we say, about impacts of human beings on animals and the terrible situations that we put them in. And it was really life-changing for me. I couldn't turn my back. I couldn't walk away. So it became really a defining part of my life. And since then, my activism has included all social justice issues, but focusing primarily on protecting animals and the environment that we all depend on.
Right. Were there people there at the Toronto Humane Society who were involved in animal rights activism? Or
I was there at a very unusual time because the board of directors had been taken over by a name that most people in the animal rights movement don't remember, but her name was Vicki Miller. And she was a vegan, active animal rights individual fighting for animals in research labs, cutting edge. She was the one that talked to a group of farmers about how the fact that chickens can live 20 years and was laughed out of the room. I mean, this was revolutionary talk at the time. And so, you know, she began to define really the more active, outreaching animal rights community. And it was really interesting to change, but it was really 2 people that changed my life. One was Clay Ruby, who's a criminal lawyer who asked me to come to the Toronto Humane Society to work. He was representing them as a lawyer at the time. And the second was Gary Francione, who many people know as somebody who's been active in the animal rights movement in New York, who challenged me in my thinking about, just being vegetarian, not vegan, and all the injustices that entails. And so those two people really changed my life in terms of becoming so engaged in this particular issue.
Right. Okay. So now you're working with the Animal Protection Party of Canada. So you're involved in the political side of activism. How long has the Animal Protection Party of Canada been around?
Well, it came into existence, interestingly, as a result of the Communist Party of Canada. And the Communist Party of Canada, about a decade before, they were closed down by Elections Canada for failing to meet the criteria under the Canada Elections Act, and they went to court. And ultimately, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that you should be able to start up a political party as long as you ran one candidate and had 250 people who said that you could be a party. And in that regard, that changed our lives, because Animal Alliance did tons of electoral work as a third party, not a registered party. But this ruling provided us with a real opportunity to actually form a real political party that was focused on animal protection and the environment. And so that happened late 2005, early 2006, in the 2006 federal election.
Okay. And since then, the Animal Protection Party has developed a platform that consists of all different aspects, including environment, health, the economy, foreign affairs, and things like that. Yeah. Are there any things in there that you would highlight as that stand out for the Animal Protection Party over the other parties?
I think the standout for the Animal Protection Party is the entire platform, because the platform really is there to provide a roadmap about what we have to do in order to avoid the crisis around global warming. And how in that whole scenario, how we can best protect animals and the environment within Canada within that scenario. So this is an entire roadmap to there. It includes social justice issues like having proper health for people, having a basic income, having food, shelter as a right, all of those, and education as a right, and a funded by the government right. And the idea of that is that you, in order for an entire society to begin to fundamentally change how they relate to the environment and the natural world, you need to fundamentally change how the society functions. And if we have a society where it's driven by consumerism and so on and so forth, it's very hard to get to where we need to be to avoid a crisis in terms of global warming and the environment. So the platform stands out because it provides us with a roadmap to get to where we need to go. It's pretty revolutionary, really, that platform, but I think it's necessary.
Yeah. When you say it's like, I was reading through a lot of it, and a lot of things have been discussed separately, like basic income and education and stuff like that. But put together all as one platform, it's basic like human rights.
It also talks about a steady state economy, which gets at the idea that we can no longer live in a society where you consume and throw out and buy constantly and have all sorts of garbage and things that are just simply used and thrown away. We have to change that. And so the steady state economy wraps in the environment as part of understanding, what it is we can and cannot do. And the economy is based on that. And so that in itself is kind of a revolutionary idea. And one that's been talked about not really talked about in any society that I know about, but one that I think really needs to be considered. The other really, I think, instructive part of the platform is this idea about changing. Animal agriculture contributes to about 25% of the global crisis that we now face. So, and also interestingly, I think feeds into this issue about viruses that are transmitted from animals to humans, and the risk that we take in that relationship. So what we focused on was a thing that was called biocyclic vegan agriculture, and that is a completely different relationship to the land and how you relate to the land and how you grow food and all that sort of stuff. And in the course of doing that, we found some people, a person in Ontario, in Quebec, who's actually practicing exactly that process. It's called different. It's called certified organic and stock free. But it is exactly the same process as in this biocyclic vegan agriculture. So it begins to completely define differently our relationship. If we're going to produce food for people, how do we do it in the most sensitive way to the environment and to the land?
Right, right. And when you talk about that kind of agriculture, that's a big shift from our current from the way that farmers currently understand agriculture.
Yeah.
And part of the platform is to is by 2030 to transition from animal agriculture to the plant-based sector.
Yeah.
Is that something you see as like a reasonable goal?
I think it's reasonable, might not be the exact description. I think it's a critical goal.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something that we have to do. And I'm hoping that the current situation that we're in gives people pause for thought about how we acquire our food, where it comes from, and what it actually means, not only to the environment, but to the lives that we take in order to produce meat. And I think that people really don't understand how at risk these animals are under this current situation. At Maple Lodge Farms, for example, in Brampton, they slaughter up to 500,000 chickens a day. 30 to 50 trucks come in a day. Some are broilers, so some are meat chickens. Others are spent hens, chickens that are at the end of their laying. And so if that plant goes down because of the COVID virus, those animals are left in cages without food. Because when you set up for either a broiler operation or for a egg laying operation, you are given the amount of grain for the 33 days that those little chicks grow into meat birds, or 18 months for the egg layers. And then there's no food. So in this crisis, we're talking about barns. Who knows what's going on in the barns if they can't actually get the chickens to slaughter. Oh. So the entire crisis in terms of cruelty, impact on the very animals that we think we should be able to eat, is really overwhelming during this time, and just points out how fragile our food delivery system is, and how terrible it is for the animals that we eat. Right,
right. It's terrifying to think about, but also at this time we've seen how individuals can make changes, like big changes in their lives too, and a lot of people now working from home and with the government help,
Yep. Exactly. I'm hoping that this discussion, where they're actually issuing checks for $2,000 for individuals, might actually spur ongoing discussion about a proper base payment that everybody gets no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like a guaranteed income of some sort.
Yeah. So how many ridings does the Animal Protection Party currently have?
We have no ridings.
Okay.
We ran.
How many districts are I'm not sure the word I'm looking for here, but
Ridings, yeah, ridings is correct. Yep.
and you're running. You have candidates in how many places?
We had this last time 17.
Okay.
So every single candidate was vegan, animal rights, social justicely directed. They were really great progressive people that were running for our party. But of course, under our current system, which is a first past the post system, that really provides advantages to the top two parties. So, you know, it's between conservatives and liberals, occasionally NDP, but mostly conservatives and liberals. And so it means that parties like the Green Party, which is considered the fourth big party, for them to get 1 or 3 people elected is just a gargantuan project. So it's very, very difficult for the other parties to actually elect somebody. That's why we were really happy when Prime Minister Trudeau announced before he got elected in 2015 that he would introduce proportional representation. Because that would mean that we'd actually have a chance. And in fact, in the Netherlands, where they have pure proportional representation, the Party for the Animals has elected 60 people from their top elected house to right down to water boards. And so they have a vast array of politicians already elected, 5 in the National Assembly and 1 in the European Parliament and 1 from Spain in the European Parliament. So there's clearly, when you have proportional representation, parties of different political stripes with different political platforms, their opinions are expressed on the electoral stage, whereas in Canada, the United States, and other countries that are first past the post, that's a much more difficult task. So we run to hold politicians accountable. It provides us with an opportunity to run, we get free national airtime, and we can run national ads, lots of national ads if we have the money to do so, and to put some of the issues out that other parties won't talk about.
Right, okay. How can people support the party then? Obviously, when the election comes up, you're looking for votes as all the other parties are, but a lot of people are thinking about you know, the lesser of 2 evils or 3, whatever it is. But
yeah, I think it's really interesting because you have to, this is part of the issue, you have to run in a defined geography. And depending on where you're running will depend on how easy or hard it is. I ran in Chrystia Freeland's riding. Clearly that was a riding that was a pretty safe Liberal seat. I ran there because of her position on her international position on the sale of labs to Saudi Arabia, the whole war thing, thinking that that needed to be raised as a critical issue, part of an environmental, the whole approach to how we work with the rest of the world, how we, you know, try and change people's attitudes in that regard, and her position, her support in the sale of those particular war machines needed to be addressed. So I ran there with little hope of getting elected. But it provides us with a real opportunity to challenge the status quo during all candidates meetings. You know, Rogers Cable often offers, cable companies often offer free airtime to the candidates in particular ridings. And so, and with literature, you have an opportunity to challenge the position of the main party and get people to think about those sorts of issues.
Right. So there are a lot of activists who like want to be more involved in politics and see that as the path forward, because obviously big change, as we're seeing recently, comes from the top down, right?
Yeah.
So
I think for the first time, since it takes a long time to build a party. That's really interesting. I thought it wouldn't take quite so long, but for the first time, I would say we had a really top-notch group of candidates in larger numbers than we have had in the past. And so I think Jordan Reichert, who's our deputy leader, and myself did a cross-Canada tour, talking to people all across the country about politics and animals. And I think that helped us attract candidates who were really interested in the issue, well-spoken and well-educated in the issues. And I think for the first time, we saw that there was a much broader appeal to people in the community, and people seeing that politics might be a way to address some of the issues that have been so difficult to address.
Right. Okay. In Ontario here, we have Bill 156 that's
Yeah.
everyone is fighting against, and other ones in other provinces. And like a lot of us, we've talked to our MPP about those. How much of that is controlled, like on the federal versus provincial level?
Well, the Bill 156 is provincial, and there's federal legislation, similar federal legislation. A lot of what is actually, a lot of it is provincially managed. And the only really, the thing that's federally managed are slaughterhouses that are federally run because they ship to beyond their provincial borders. So any animals that are killed and shipped outside of, say, Ontario would be killed at a federal plant. Any animals that are killed and shipped only in Ontario would be killed at a provincial plant. So federally, most of the slaughterhouses are federal, and a lot of the transportation across provincial borders then becomes a federal activity managed under the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. But in Ontario and other provinces, farms, all that sort of stuff is provincially managed. And so this piece of legislation affects a broad swath of the agricultural community. And there was a really horrible video that was done by Last Chance for Animals, who did an undercover investigation in a goat milk farm.
Okay.
Documenting terrible conditions for these animals. And they went through, after they collected the information, they went through the proper process. They contacted the OSPCA. The OSPCA then decided they weren't going to do this anymore. So they contacted the proper federal government people to actually look at this. And I wrote to the minister, the Honorable Ernie Hardeman, to say, look at this situation in relation to the Ag-Gag bill, and tell me now how you're going to protect those animals, given that you don't want anybody to document what is going on in these barns. And you know, that even when there are workers in barns, if they decided to put a camera on themselves and videotape it, if they didn't have permission of the owner, they would be in violation as well. So there is just no way to get the information out. How are you going to deal with these situations? And I could not get an answer from them about this particular situation and situations like this, because a number have been documented. And so what's really worrisome is that behind this facade that the government has said, I've talked about food safety and all this sort of food security and safety, is a big wall that prevents what the real story is that's going on in barns all over Ontario and in fact across Canada. The more disturbing one, I would argue, is the Ag-Gag law in Alberta, which backdates violations.
Oh.
So if you did it passed in like 2019, but if you did something that violated the bill in 2018, then you could be charged under the bill, which I don't think will legally stand, but it's trying to get at people who had occupied a barn, I believe in 2018. So we'll see where all that goes.
Yeah, it's unbelievable that that no one will address these videos and things that have come forward and things that we know are going on.
The thing is that if they started to address them,
mm,
I know what they're afraid of is because when you have 40,000 chickens in a barn, 300 pigs in a barn, 300, breeding sows in a barn, you can't possibly care for all those animals properly. It's not possible. And so all of a sudden you expose the industrial animal agriculture for what it is just that these are tools, these animals are tools to produce meat for us in the fastest, cheapest possible way, and does not take into account animal welfare issues. And so this law is simply to cover that up.
Yeah, but it could get worse as well. Like we've seen over the years, these operations have gotten bigger and more efficient if you don't consider the animals as individuals. So and not addressing it could lead to bigger problems as well, right?
Well, I think the, you look at the various viruses, pigs to humans is one that is well documented, and what we're finding, and there's been lots of bird flu. In fact, through this whole COVID virus in Germany, they've had an outbreak of bird flu there. Luckily, it hasn't totally been transmissible to humans, but these are viruses that mutate and change, and we know can skip from animals to human beings. So I think we're just playing with wildfire to continue on allowing intensive animal agriculture and massive use of antibiotics and all sorts of different things to maintain this very troubled structure. And I'm hoping that COVID-19 might actually wake some people up to say we need to redefine how we do agriculture in this country.
Yeah, I hope so too. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back with more. Okay, we're back with Liberation Hour Radio, 102.7 FM in Kitchener-Waterloo, and Liberation Hour Radio on Facebook and YouTube. We're here speaking with Liz White, the leader of the Animal Protection Party of Canada. And we talked about some of the things that are happening right now with COVID-19 and how this is affecting people and how we look at animal agriculture. So I wanted to ask you too, now that we're back, about what are some of the initiatives that you're currently working on with the Animal Protection Party of Canada?
A lot of the initiatives that we work on, well, we deal with domestic animals as well as wild animals. So on the domestic animal side, we do a lot of work to try and figure out how to improve shelters and pounds so that the euthanasia rate is down and that the adoption rate is up, all that sort of good stuff. But the main issue that we're working on now is the use of animals in research and looking at that whole area, which is quite troubling, actually. We use over 4 million animals a year in Canada. That is not a total number because it's a voluntary, the Canadian Council on Animal Care, which collects the data on the numbers of animals used, it's a voluntary joining of that body. And so those companies that are using animals that don't belong to the CCAC, those animals are not counted. So we're not really sure of the exact amount. The one area that we thought was an easy way into talking about a very difficult situation is that the fact that pet animals that end up in pounds and other shelters and even humane societies and rescue groups end up in research laboratories and are subjected to any number of procedures, mostly in the teaching side of it, but not all in the teaching side of it. And so our position is that those animals shouldn't be going to research at all, and that pounds and shelters are to be areas to protect animals that are vulnerable and at risk, and that should be their role, not to provide cheap and free animals to research laboratories. In Ontario, it's $2 for a cat, $6 for a dog. That's what research facilities pay pounds and shelters. So these are a cheap source of animal as opposed to a purpose-bred animal that might start at $400 and end up at $800. So there is, so that's one of the campaigns that we're working on. We've done a pile of freedom of information to try and find out exactly what's going on. In Ontario, there's an Animals for Research Act, so we have a mechanism to get that information. But I have to tell you, after doing, I don't know, 20 or 30 freedom of information requests to the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, which is the ministry that deals with animals in research, it's very difficult to tell. We've been denied a list of all of the research facilities in Ontario. We've got some of them, but not all of them. We've been denied any information about what research facility uses what animal. We've been denied information about a facility like St. Mike's in Toronto. Do they use dogs and cats? We can't get that information. So even the most basic information is very difficult to get. However, having said that, we're mounting a campaign to try and get this to stop. So it'll be interesting to see where all this goes.
Wow.
On the wildlife side, one of the main issues that is highly troubling is this issue that has been brought forward by the Premier Ford and the Ontario Progressive Conservative government to basically rid the province of double-crested cormorants. Now, double-crested cormorants are, I don't know, people may not know, they're big black birds. They are they're water birds. They're colonial water birds. You probably have seen them flying across Lake Ontario, these big black birds that fly just over the water. In Tommy Thompson Park in downtown Toronto is the largest cormorant colony in North America, but in Hamilton Harbor there's some, and really in some of the smaller lakes in and around Ontario. The government has proposed that they become a hunting bird, that they be a game bird, even though these are birds that are not, people don't eat. So they've amended the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act to allow these birds to spoil if they're shot. And they're proposing to shoot 50 birds per hunter per day for 291 days of the year. So we're talking about 14,500 birds killed per hunter, with 197,000 hunters that would be permitted to shoot these birds in Ontario. So we're talking about an extermination program, and our goal, the one upside, I guess, that you could say of COVID-19, and I don't say this lightly at all, but it has stalled the government's progress in putting this plan into place. So for another year, the cormorants might be safe from this aggressive, nasty plan. But the fact of the matter is that they're intending to move forward on this.
And what is their goal in doing that? Like, is it just hunting for sport? Like, or are they trying to exterminate these birds because they're pests, or is there another reason?
It's really interesting. Their claim is that they destroy trees and they eat fish, so that they're in competition with the commercial fisheries and the sport fisheries on the Great Lakes. So we looked carefully at the stats for the commercial fisheries. Lake Erie has the largest freshwater fishing in the world, fishery in the world. It's really interesting. Like, it has massive numbers of commercial fish that are taken. So I looked at the total allowable catch given each year for the commercial fisheries in Lake Erie, and the total allowable catch has never been reduced, even though there are two of the largest cormorant colonies on the Lake Erie water in the terms of Middle Island, Big Brother Island, and East Sister Island all have fairly substantial cormorant colonies. and the fish population does not seem to have gone down. Secondly, cormorants eat invasive species. So they eat round gobies and alewives. Round gobies and alewives are about a right size for cormorants, and they school, so they're easier for the cormorants to catch. So they don't even eat fish, most fish,
Right.
that are commercially wanted. And as far as I can tell, the sport fishery industry in Lake Erie and through the rest of Ontario is not suffering as a result of cormorants. So from our point of view, it's a trumped up excuse.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to back you up a little bit too. And you talked about shelters and pounds selling the animals. That's pretty disturbing stuff. Do you know of specific ones? Is the Humane Society involved in selling animals for research as well?
Well, it's hard for us to tell who, but I freedom of information to OMAFRA to get inspection reports of research facilities. So we've got 323 of them. And in a number of them, it talks about animals that were acquired from pounds, humane societies, and rescue groups. It doesn't say which humane societies, it doesn't say for what purpose they're being used, but here in this inspection report of a particular research facility, there are the statements that these animals were acquired from those sources. So it's quite clear, you know, that they're being taken to research facilities. It's unclear as to what they're being used for.
Yeah, and you can get this, well, theoretically, you can get this information through the research facilities themselves. Are the actual pounds and shelters under the same restrictions? Like, can you get any information from them directly? What has happened to the animals that have come through there?
That's very hard to get. We did a freedom of information because the same people who inspect the research facilities also inspect the pounds. So we asked for all the pound reports, got 787 of those, and those reports have nothing about what happens to the animals in them. It's about what the structural is. Are the cages clean? Do they have broken wires? Is there cracks in the floor? You know, it's that kind of structural thing. Not really clear about what happens to the animals, and there's no reporting on the numbers of animals that they bring in and what the end result of what happens to the animals that come into that facility. We do know in 2002, so this is a long time ago, but this is the one hard bit of evidence we have, that a dog named Royal, who was a 13-year-old golden retriever, got lost from his property, and they had just moved there. So the people in the town didn't know where to take the dog back. So they called the pound, which was the right thing to do, and the pound keeper came and picked up Royal and sold Royal to research the day that he was taken into the pound. They sold him to the University of Guelph for research. He was taken to the University of Guelph. Now, this dog had a collar. He'd been treated for hot spots. He'd been groomed. He was clearly an owned animal. He walked off the truck, and because he was 13, he was euthanized before the person who lost that dog ever had a chance. So the pound was in violation of the Animals for Research Act. The University of Guelph was in violation for taking that dog. They were in violation of the Animals for Research Act. The pound keeper ultimately got shut down. The University of Guelph, nothing ever happened to them. So there is a message in that it's a pretty lax system when animals can just, you know, arrive and nobody even checks. Is this animal here legally? Has the animal been held for a legal period of time? Nope. Animal walks off the truck, too old, euthanized, bang, gone. And, you know, the person who was Royal's family had been spending the whole time frantically looking for him. And we had to go to extraordinary lengths to get them to actually admit what happened to Royal.
Wow.
Nobody would just tell the family what happened to Royal. They had to be pushed and shoved and exposed, and media conferences and the whole ball of wax before anybody was told what happened to Royal.
Wow. It's heartbreaking to think about.
Yeah.
Um, so with the things that you're currently working on, do you have different categories for animals who are pets and as well as wildlife and agricultural animals? Or do you just take on issues as they come up?
A lot of times we take on issues that have come up because we find that that's how it's possible to garner the attention of the people who are involved. So that happens a lot when we're trying to resolve human wildlife conflicts in a way that doesn't involve lethal management. So we do a lot of work on deer. A lot of people surprisingly don't like deer and don't want them around and would rather have them removed from their community than they would tolerate them. So we've done a lot of work on deer culls all across the country. Beaver, who, if you look at the global warming issue, are critical to the maintenance of waterways, to the refurbishment of degraded environments, and so on and so forth. It was really interesting. A woman by the name of, now what's her name? Can't remember. Anyway, she did a study. She's at University of Alberta. She did a study in northern Alberta about an area that had been trapped free of beaver and another area where beaver had been allowed. And the richness of the community that had beaver versus the depletion of the community that didn't have beaver just demonstrated how important they are to the ecosystem. But beaver jam up, put dams in, cause floods, plug culverts. And so the go-to solution to that is to get a trapper. If you call the Ministry of Natural Resources, they'll say, here's the name of a trapper, call the trapper and they'll come and trap the beaver and get rid of the problem for you. When in fact, you know, these dams and culvert blockings and so on are repeatedly done and very costly to repair. Sorry. So we've designed a program with the help of a number of people who have built alternatives to it, like beaver deceivers, beaver bafflers. They're kind of devices that redirect the flow of water while still maintaining the beaver dam. So the beaver continues to build the dam, but the water continues to flow. So those are the kinds of approaches, and they often come episodically as communities face these problems and somebody gives us a call.
I see. Okay.
We've produced documents, the Beaver Mitigation Manual, Canada Goose Mitigation Manual, that's on the website that people can access if they want to look at things differently in their community. So people are welcome to look at those and call us if they need any help.
Okay, that's fantastic. One other thing I wanted to ask you about was a lot of activism, or some of the activism that's happening recently is around Rose's Law, which is a Bill of Rights for animals, and what they're doing is exactly what like Bill 156 and others, the ag laws are trying to prevent, is going into farms and exposing the conditions there. Can you tell me, like, from the perspective of the government, what does Rose's Law mean, and how would we enact something like that in Canada?
I think what government should do is to establish a transparent farm inspection program. I think it's very difficult for people to go in on farms and actually document what's really going on. And we see a snapshot of what the situation might be on the farm, and in some cases there's real abuses on the farm, and those need to be dealt with. But what we really need to do is to see a proper picture. But I mean, even exposing that and saying that animals should have rights to food, shelter, water, be free of pain, you know, be able to exercise, be able to do all these wonderful things. When you're talking about intensive animal agriculture, that's just not going to happen.
Mhm.
You know, we've been fighting to get pigs out of farrowing crates, and you know, they're maybe talking about it in 2024, and chickens out of egg laying operations where there's 5 or 6 chickens into something more humane, and that's going to happen in like 2024 maybe.
Mhm.
I think what we really need to do is to go after the entire industry, from the point of view that we need to dismantle the way it's happening. There is no way under the current system that we can, with the numbers of animals that we're talking about, with you know, a slaughter of 500 million birds, you know,
Right.
you know, that 500,000 birds a day in one slaughterhouse, or 10,000 pigs in a day in a slaughterhouse. So you can imagine, if you back that up into the farms, what volume of animals we're dealing with. So I think we need to get at the root cause of it. The thing with the animal agriculture part of it is that it's a, you know, for a lot of part of it is a just-in-time system. So it's it means that when you fertilize an egg, the slaughter date is set, the amount of food is set, the amount of water the bird gets is set. All of those things are set in place. And so it means, I think, that the system is quite vulnerable to things like COVID virus, and other aspects. So I think it's a system that requires some real change. And I think the change has to come through legislation, frankly. And activism is a part of exposing that, but we also need to do the legislative work.
Right, right. Yeah, I think the goal of Rose's Law is to expose the conditions so that obviously people see these and stop eating animals as much as possible. But you're right, there's a legislative part that definitely needs to sooner rather than later.
You know, I think it's really interesting that people can look at the terrible cruelty, but have a disconnect when they eat their meat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that disconnect has allowed the industry to become what it is, partly because we don't see the cruelty, and partly because people either don't look at it, don't want to look at it, or if they do look at it, can say, well, you know, I buy range free, or, you know, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at the end of the day, it's a much bigger thing. It's about the environment. It's about our health. It means, you know, a lot of diseases that we have are because we consume animal products and animal byproducts. And, you know, right now we're talking about, we need to prevent these things, not deal with them when they come at us. And so, you know, helping with heart disease and all sorts of different things, consuming less animals or no animals at all, would help with that.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to say about the Animal Protection Party, or what people should do to get involved in this?
Well, we'd love people to get involved, and anybody who thinks that they might like to be a candidate. We're looking for candidates. The election isn't for, well, 2 years, but really I think we're talking probably closer to 4 years given where we're at. It's a minority government, so sometimes it doesn't last quite as long. But we're looking for candidates. We'd like to do interviews. We're looking really for candidates who are vegan, who have some grounding in the animal movement of some sort. So that would be wonderful. Giving a donation to the Animal Protection Party would be fantastic too. You get a tax receipt, which is fantastic. And it also means that we engage regularly with our supporters to figure out what should our platform look like, what are the issues that we haven't covered enough, all that sort of stuff. So you become part of an actual political movement. And then I would encourage people who are jaundiced, let's say, about politics. They don't like politicians. You know, they feel that politicians don't tell the truth, all that sort of stuff. The fact of the matter is, whether we like it or not, those are the people who are going to make the decisions about animals, whether they live, whether they die, what kinds of lives they live, when they live, how badly they're treated, and so on and so forth. It's politicians who make that decision. And so becoming politically engaged tells the politicians that there is a group of people who care desperately about these issues. And those politicians aren't going to get their votes unless some of the requirements of those people who are going to vote are reflected in federal and provincial and municipal politics. So the more we're involved, the more we're engaged, the more we meet with our politicians and talk to them, the more we demand change, the more they recognize us as a constituency that requires them to listen.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you, and thank you for all the work that you do. What is the website for the Animal Protection Party?
Animalprotectionparty.ca.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and Animal Alliance is animalalliance.ca, so easy to get to.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh.
Hopefully we'll be able to follow up with you the next time we have an election, and we'll be making progress.
Great, and if there's people you know that want to run, send them my way.
Okay, great.
Okay, super.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.